To address you all here, and apologies. I think one has to have a standard line of apologies for all events, not just me, all of you, because of the many competing events and overlapping activities. But I'm very happy to be part of this, especially with my affiliation with Durham University as now visiting professor at Durham. And until 5 days ago, I was a member of its international advisory board for the business school for many terms, and I think exhausted all extensions, but I'm happy to be of service to that and its students and research community in any capacity, even for a few minutes like today. Let me get the issue of the GST in context and perhaps give you an update on something that I was very much involved in, more than others during the last 2 years or so, on the Green Climate Fund that reached good results yesterday, but it gives you a lot of issues about governance. One aspect of the work here that we have a formal, comprehensive, forward-looking, practical and pragmatic stock-taking exercise, the first of its kind since the Paris Agreement. It has implications. Yesterday, I moderated a session with heads of state and NGOs, civil society organizations, focusing on the needs of implementation, on finance, on technology, incentives, and the rest of the means of implementation. Yesterday as well, my good friend Nigel Topping, who served my function for COP26, did the same function on mitigation, and Razan Mubarak did the same thing for adaptation. I think it was very much useful to have a kind of a comprehensive update of what the specialists already know, because many of you, if you are specialized on adaptation, on mitigation, even the details related to the gaps and how to bring them, are not used to them. Basically, to bring that, and this is not the annual update from the IPCC, which we rely on, and the GST itself is based on this science-based, evidence-based approach. It is not like the different scattered approaches to the matters, and actually in an hour or less from now, I'll be discussing a report on adaptation actions and finance. It's a comprehensive one, it's a formal one, in terms of consensus building about what we should really be doing in the future. There are many ways to deal with that. One, I hope that won't be just a bureaucratic update, which is basically revisiting our NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. And it has been seen in many cases. I'm coming from an Arab African country. I can tell you of the case, focusing perhaps on adaptation. $11 billion of adaptation finance flew to Africa last year. What is required by NDCs is 55 billion. And what is expected to flow by the experts is 110 billion. Each number of these could be a subject to a PhD thesis, because you talk about the 11 billion, you can talk about governance, commitments, accountability, why adaptation is not incentivized, why some heads of state and heads of corporations are making promises and pledges that they do not commit themselves in doing. And what could be the best accountability framework for that? Is it enough just to provide these kind of peer reviews every year? And what happens if you fail? Here, at the international level, and you are experts on international law, there is little that you can do here. If a country commits and don't deliver, and if this country has a change of government, you say, well, it's a previous government, not subject to democracy, so let's start again. And this is an issue of concern that is basically not just out of legitimacy of the whole thing, but it has its own risk that has never been discussed in the context of governance and accountability, because people who talk about governance and accountability, they say there could be some sort of mishaps, irregularities, some issues that need to be fixed in the regulatory framework. But they didn't say, well, what if, and this is a real case example, if I listen carefully to one of the top officials from a European country, I will not name him, because the country is not here. And then, because of that, I invested heavily in green hydrogen. And there was a promise to provide me with concessional finance as a minister or a member of government. And then changes happen, commissions leave, heads of governments leave, and then where is the accountability here? Am I making a deal with a person, or is it an institution? What are the elements of continuity? And what can beyond MOUs? MOUs are never binding. They are nice in many cases just for photo taking opportunities. But when it comes to the implication, they are leaving a lot of reserve. So this is just one thing that gets me into that 11 billion and incentives. The 55 is telling me another story, that the NDCs are not reflect a reality. And they could be self-restraining, self-repressing themselves by not being ambitious enough. Why in the adaptation? Because they say, well, if I'm going to say that my company, home country Egypt, for instance, puts an X amount of money, in this case, the government would know that no less than 97% of the finances should come from public money. Is it news to you? Everybody knows that adaptation financed by private sector is only 3% to 5%. So this is another area. There could be a reason beyond what we know about the NDCs, and some of them are better than others. Governments are not with the same sophistication or inclusiveness when they do that. The third part is the gap between the NDCs and the 110 billion, which is basically the critical minimum of requirements for African countries, and that was mentioned in the GST last week. That was mentioned by 6 heads of state from Africa when they say, well, we didn't contribute to the emissions. We are only 3 to 4%, the whole continent of Africa, which in itself an indication of poverty, low consumption, low production, because nobody should really assume that they are doing better in production with a cleaner technology. They are using the same available technology with its implications of emissions. So if your emissions are lower than your average, global average, this means that you are consuming less and producing less. This doesn't mean that you are doing better in the welfare and you are saving the planet at the same time. So injustice is basically one of the areas that has been a focus of the GC. How to fix it? We fix it by 3 things, that's all. One is through, depends really on how to get it. First, technology, R&D, that would be really important in all areas of work when it comes to climate action. And today, we are better in producing electricity from renewables many times if we compare us only 10 years back. You can afford doing that because of R&D, production at scale, thanks to China, R&D thanks to Europe and US, and wonderful engineers from Africa, from Arab countries, who adapt these technologies to local needs. But that needs this kind of ecosystem not to be broken. Your point about the politics and geopolitics, if any segment of this ecosystem is compromised, you cannot really have the Bindan project of Egypt, which is one of the biggest in the world in producing electricity from solar, or there was that of Morocco, or definitely one of the promising projects that was just opened last week here in the UAE. So this ecosystem needs to be complete for that first building pillar of making the change based on the outcomes of the GST. The second one is finance that I just spoke about. And here I need you to please consult 2 reports. One by Verizon and Nexter on the gaps of finance for climate, telling us that we have a gap of $2.4 trillion per year, and this is excluding China. 1.4 trillion should come from domestic resources and 1 trillion from outside resources. Good luck with that. I mentioned the GCF. It was an uphill struggle with some countries just to mobilize the number of $12,475 million. Some countries were only contributing 4 or 5 million, with all due respect, of course, to their contribution. But it was not easy for their leaders to get this money out of the budget. So this is another area that you need to focus on when we talk about how to bridge the gaps of finance, public, private, domestic, and external. Does it remind you of another important report, an old report that goes back to 2015 of the Addis agenda of the SDGs? It followed the same protocol. And the final thing is in your domain. It's governance, incentives, regulatory frameworks, integrity. The current work now that is led last year by former Minister of Climate and Environment of Canada, McKenna. It produced 10 recommendations. Now we have 2 co-chairs from the US and China trying to operationalize and push these recommendations into the world of better understanding what they call recognition and accountability. And here will be then the chief accountability officer of the world. At the country level, governments are accountable to their parliament and to the civil society. At the company level, CEOs are accountable to their general assemblies. But for this world, people can just say, I promise, I will, I should, and then we can get away without any kind of mention to what we did. Here, I think the whole thing needs really to come, and nobody really improved this system of accountability, but there is an implicit assumption that each entity has its own accountability framework and has either political assembly or a shareholders assembly, or more important, the common domain with civil society and sharing information to expose leaders of business and government, and actually as well, some of the civil society organizations, what they should be doing. Great deal of work is ahead of us from now until 2030, and we don't need to think beyond that. There will be another discussion after 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.